Hey buddy, morning. Dad here, and we're on, let's see, day 5 now. So another 95 days to go, but still excited about it, and certainly got some more things to share. So yesterday I did something that I haven't done for a while, but it's something that I do probably every few years. And I read a story about a guy called Arlen D. Williams, who the story goes in January 1982. He was on an aeroplane from flying to Florida, Flight 90 out of Washington's National Airport. And he gets on the plane, and the plane takes off and starts to shudder and stall. And as the story goes, the pilot turns to the co-pilot and says, "We're going to go down." And his co-pilot says, "I know it." And then a few seconds later, the aeroplane slammed into the 14th Street Bridge and plunged into the icy waters of the Potomac River. The fuselage had broken free from the tail section with all of its passengers still strapped to their seats. Just a tragic situation, and it was a cold, icy winter's day. I think the temperature was below freezing, and I think that was one of the reasons why the aeroplane had problems. There was ice on the wings. But a few moments later, there were 5 or 6 people bobbing in the water, trying to hold on to what they could, what debris they could. And there was jet fuel in the water, a number of people screaming. One lady lost her child, a young baby, and just a tragic situation. And as the story goes, the US Park Police helicopter came across and started to drop lifelines. And each lifeline that was dropped, this guy, who they call the man in the water, grabbed the lifeline each time and he handed it to someone else in sub-freezing temperatures, hand it to the next person. The person would get hold of it, the helicopter would pull them out of the water, and then it would come back with another lifeline. On one occasion, it dropped 2 lifelines down, and he caught them both and handed them to someone else. Each time, just assisting someone else to get out of the water as quickly as they possibly could. And the tragedy of the story is that when the helicopter came back the last time to get him, he was gone. He'd succumbed to probably his injuries, to the cold, and he disappeared under the water. And at the time, they called him the man in the water and didn't know what his name was. His name was actually Arlen D. Williams. And he was a middle-aged bank examiner who was on his way to Florida to do some work for the company that he worked for. And the papers combed his background, tried to find out what was it about this man that caused him to do such a heroic act. And they looked at everything and they couldn't find very much. He was married, he had a couple of kids. I think he was about 42 years old. But just a phenomenal story about someone who was willing to pass the line each time to someone else to allow them to get out of the water as quickly as they could. And just a great story about understanding what human beings are capable of, but also what people are willing to do in certain situations. And on this occasion, he was willing to give up his own life for the life of other people. Now, you and I are probably never, ever going to have to deal with a situation like that, thank goodness. But it made me think about a situation that I think is so important. And this situation really comprises what I call the 4 virtues of life. And I've used these throughout my life. And this message kind of goes back to the one I did a couple of days ago on what we can and can't control, and really understanding that we can't control everything, that there are certain things that are completely out of our control. And the only thing we really have control over is us, is what we think, how we respond to someone else's attitude, what we do, where we go, what we eat, how we think. You know, even our own bodies to a certain extent, we can't control everything. If we get ill or whatever the case may be, we can't always control that. But these 4 living virtues are what I would call they're human abilities that, if you can harness these, will give you so much the advantage in your life. And so the first one is control, to recognize that you can't control everything, that things will happen irrespective of what you want to happen, and often that might upset you. People might act in certain ways that you don't think are in the best interest of what you want. But recognize that being able to control yourself is ultimately the foundational key of all effectiveness in business and in life. I can control me. I can't control anyone else. I can't control their attitude, but I can control how I respond to that. And I can control what I think about certain situations or how I react. There's an old saying that says, if you can take two opposing feelings or two opposing thoughts, psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. But if you can take two opposing feelings or two opposing thoughts and hold them in the same space at the same time, that is the mark of an incredible human being. That is the mark of someone who has become mature in their ability to navigate life and in their ability to see situations as they really are. And you'll come across situations in life where you think someone should act a certain way or should do something in a certain way. And one of the best things you can do is just step back in your own mind and say, what would happen if I thought the complete opposite to this? And just to try and get a balanced view of a whole situation. And someone cuts in front of you in a car on the motorway and you want to shout and scream and swear at them. But if I can recognize or try and have an opposing view of that situation, that helps me function in a more effective way sort of each and every day. And it doesn't mean that you absolve other people of responsibility, but what it means is it allows you to cope with the situation and deal with it in a more effective way. So the first one is control. And Arlen D. Williams recognized in that moment when he's in the water that he didn't have a control over much, but he did take control of the very things he had control over, which was catching the rope, and he chose to hand it to someone else. Catching the rope, handed it to someone else, and he did that 4 or 5 times. So the second living virtue is courage. So clearly Arlen D. Williams was able to recognize in that moment that he had some control, and he took that and he displayed courage with it by handing the rope to someone else, allowing them to get out of the water. Each time it came, he handed it back. Courage is so important in life, the ability to recognize and see situations and go into them in spite of fear. This is exactly what this man did in this heroic situation. So remember, life virtue number 2 is courage. The third virtue is integrity. So what does integrity mean? A lot of times people say, well, if you have integrity, it means you do the right thing. Well, integrity actually means wholeness, being integrated, which is what the root of the word comes from. Integer, which means to be integrated. And that just means, are you being true to yourself? So, people say, Hitler didn't have integrity. Well, actually, he probably did because he was true to what he believed. Mother Teresa had integrity because she was true to what she believed. This isn't necessarily a moral judgment. Are we being true to ourselves, and do we have integrity over what we think is important in that given moment? So the first one is control, second is courage, the third is integrity, and the last one is wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge rightly applied. Wisdom is taking information, taking knowledge, and using it with judgment. Essentially, that really is what wisdom is all about. And the ability to do that is really the mark of an exceptional human being. A lot of times we know what to do, but we don't always do what we know. If we can read, but we don't read, then we might as well not be able to read. If we can act in a certain way or do something in a certain situation, and we choose not to do that, then we're not showing wisdom. So these are the 4 living virtues: control, courage, integrity, and wisdom. Live by them. You can always fall back on them. Anyone can apply them. And I think for you, if you can start to foster them at an early age, they'll pay dividends for the rest of your life. Anyway, as ever, love you lots, and I'll be back on tomorrow.